Ooh, this is a short chapter. Should be able to fit this into one video, no problem.
1 hour later.
But that's just in the first section? Welcome back. Sadly, I think we're past the cutesy Dr. Caceres' descent into madness at this point. This chapter was deeply unsettling, which is saying something since the last chapter we talked about physically disciplining your children. And as hinted in the pre-roll, we're just going to cover the first section in this video because there was just too much to say on this. I'll get the YouTube channel stuff out of the way now before I feel like I really need to shower. Unclean. Like if you found this video edutational. Comment with your own questions or if you have answers to some of the questions I have in this video. You can support hopefully less bleak content in the future of this channel on Patreon. And you can also catch me on Discord or Twitter. And I think that's everything. Links for everything are in the description box below. As with the previous Peterson videos, this configuration of lights and overlays indicate the straight Peterson flow. This is my response to the Petersoning, and this is the empirical experimental stuff I'm bringing in. Alright, Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Here we go. Yay. We open this chapter with what feels like a markedly strange assertion, at least to this atheist. Peterson says that the people behind the tragedies at Sandy Hook, Aurora, Columbine shouldn't reasonably be described as religious, but that they had a problem with reality that existed at a religious depth. At religious depth just seems like such a strange metric, but maybe it's just me having such a strong reaction to this first paragraph. Next comes the start of one of the disturbing things in this chapter. Peterson quotes one of the Columbine duo to illustrate how nihilistic they were and how they thought that the planet should be free from people. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't important things to pull from the writings of people who go out and do these heinous acts. We absolutely should be trying to figure out what was going on inside their heads so we can prevent these things from happening again. What I am saying is that finding quotes from these writers in a self-help book is weird. And no, I won't be including these quotes in this video. For the morbidly curious, I can provide the references, but I'm not putting them in this video. But going back to the idea that the target audience for this book is disenfranchised young men, the inclusion of these quotes from these writers does make a perverse kind of sense. And therein squats the toad. If Peterson is able to reach these young men before they commit to that dark path in life, and they embrace the 12 rules and find a more positive way to live, is that a lesser evil that I should accept? That I'm making this video series would suggest that I'm not willing to accept that people just blindly follow the 12 rules without thinking about it. Optimistically, I see the 12 rules for life as a kind of stepping stone. People find it, they read it, and it's in a time in their life when they need somebody to tell them how to live. Over time, hopefully, they will come to critically think about this and other things that they're being told on how to live their life. They're able to take the messages that are good for them, discard the ones that aren't, and grow as a person. But that's enough of this tangent. Peterson says that the type of people who go out and do these heinous acts see being with a capital B as unfair and corrupt and appoint themselves as the ones to fix it.
They are the ultimate critics.
I can't exactly pinpoint my discomfort with this quote. Maybe it's because he's putting criticism on a spectrum with me on one end and people who go out to do as much damage as they can on the other. Or maybe it's that he's sort of implying that criticism is dangerous. Further quoting of the same writer, before Peterson summarizes to say that some of these people just want to watch the world burn. Peterson then invokes Faust to explain how some people could arrive at this conclusion. Let's Cliff Notes Faust before moving forward. The closest I ever came to covering it in school or anything was PBS's Wishbone when I was younger, so my knowledge of the story is foggy at best. The story of Faust has seen many adaptations over the centuries, but it started out as a German legend. The gist of the story is that Faust is a learned man who gets dissatisfied with his life. At this point, the devil shows up and makes a pact with him. His soul in exchange for all the knowledge and pleasure he could possibly want for a period of time. When that time's up, devil gets his soul. Whether or not Faust is eternally damned depends on the version you're going with. Peterson directly refers to the version by Goethe, so spoilers for a centuries-old play. Faust is ultimately saved from damnation by his propensity to be a stick up the devil's ass, and also the pleading of his wife who was killed for killing their demon-spawn baby. Okay, so Peterson says that the devil in Faust, Mephistopheles, is the opposite or antithesis of being. Given my elementary knowledge of Faust, I did a little digging around to see if I could get somebody else's interpretation for what the meaning of this play was. From what I found, I'm honestly surprised Peterson hasn't brought up this play more. Mephistopheles is the spirit who negates, so he is an agent of chaos and is put in direct opposition against God, who is, unsurprisingly, the creator and representation of order. In this play, Faust, and by extension the audience, learn about the darker aspects of human nature from Mephistopheles, and in the process, Faust ideologically wrestles with the devil and learns about the human capacity for evil, but also learns that it's not limitless like it is for devils. Peterson leans into this negation aspect of Mephistopheles and Mephistopheles' derivation from the darker aspects of human nature. Peterson argues that
People think often in the Mephistophelian manner, although they seldom act upon their thoughts as brutally as the mass murderers of school, college, and theater.
Peterson lists off a bunch of bad things that can happen, and then says that this can lead us to question being and then to curse it, given how awful life can be. I, like most people alive, have experienced some of these negative things that Peterson talks about. And in moments of unadulterated pain and weakness, I have wished bad things to happen to one person in particular, but I never saw myself as this spirit of vengeance or anything carrying out those things. I just sort of wish for bad things to happen. And I'm actually kind of horrified that Peterson writes about this as if it's normal. Peterson dons the Captain Hindsight mantle and says that though life can be difficult and hard, sometimes it's the person's fault. If they stopped doing the actions that led to the bad outcomes, their life wouldn't be so bad. But even given that, life is limited and we all die.
In the final analysis, we do not appear to be the architects of our own fragility. Whose fault is it then?
Why does death have to be anyone's fault? When my dad died unexpectedly, I didn't have some big theatrical moment where I went outside in the rain and screamed up to the heavens, why? I mean, it was awful. Sometimes life is just awful that way. His doctors did what they could, but his body betrayed him.
People who are very ill, or worse, who have a sick child, will inevitably find themselves asking, whose fault is it, whether they are religious believers or not. The same is true of someone who finds his shirt sleeve caught in the gears of a giant bureaucracy, who is suffering through a tax audit, or fighting an interminable lawsuit or divorce. And it's not only the obviously suffering who are tormented by the need to blame someone or something for the intolerable state of their being.
As you all have access to now on this channel, I have a chronic pain condition. it sucks. Maybe at some point I went through some process of trying to assign blame, or at least how did this happen? But it wasn't some intense driven process. It was more like, what? How? Oh yeah, wisdom teeth extraction. That probably did it. Par for the course on my luck, really. And I moved on with my life. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year, my mind did try to figure out if I could think of any exposure she's had to carcinogens in her life, and beyond that, no blame game. Am I a weird duck that I'm not trying to assign blame to everything? Let me know in the comments. Weird duck or no, this needing to blame thing that Peterson keeps coming back to is bothering me. So let's do a quick research dive, because of course Peterson doesn't provide any citations here. Since this is well outside my area of expertise, I fired up Google Scholar and saw what returned for blame life or suffering. And I found some interesting things, but nothing really speaking on the universality of this need to blame things for bad events. First one that I'm going to talk about is a study directly detailing something similar to what Peterson talked about in the previous quote: women's experience after having a stillbirth. Stillbirth is described to be in a weird gray area that people don't like to discuss. Death of a child is acknowledged to be gut-wrenching, but for many people, a stillbirth is treated as a non-event, one that doesn't require mourning. Due to the nature of this event, expectant mothers may believe that they are responsible for it happening, and this is worsened in areas where the medical professionals also blame the mother for it. Either supernatural origins, like the mother's having to pay for past sins, or natural explanations, like its diet or lifestyle. Women who had experienced a stillbirth were recruited into this experiment, thanks to the magic of the internet, and they were asked about their experiences of it, as well as checked for distress, specifically depression and anxiety. Around 42% at some point blamed some source for the stillbirth. Of that 42%, a quarter blamed medical providers, 11% blamed others, this could be like the father of the child or God, and another quarter blamed themselves. About 15% blamed more than one source, so that's why the numbers are a little funny there. This means that about 60%-ish did not report blaming some source for this event happening. About 40% of the respondents also had elevated distress scores, so that was the depression and anxiety. And this higher distress was associated with that self-blame for the stillbirth. Tying this back to Peterson's claim, some mothers did go through this questioning, blaming process after this event. Some, not all. And the mothers who didn't go through that blaming, questioning process didn't tend to have the higher distress scores. The second paper I'm going to talk about is trying to make an important distinction in the types of attributions that can be made after an event happens. First is the cause of an event. This is what set the something in motion and will usually involve a person in some way. Linking this back to the previous experiment, the mothers who did assign blame were attributing the cause of death to themselves or others. Second is the responsibility for the event. A person will be viewed as being more responsible for an event if they were 1. Involved in the cause, 2. Knew about the potential consequences of the event, 3. Intended for the event to occur, 4. Willingly kicked off the event, and 5. Knew what they were doing was wrong. Finally is the blame for the event. The person making the attribution has to weigh the person's justification or excuse for the event and decide if they buy it. HBO's Chernobyl, and the actual event itself, can help illustrate the differences here. The cause of the meltdown event was arguably Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer at the Chernobyl power plant, who forced the safety test to happen. The responsibility for the event spreads the people involved a bit further. Dyatlov checks a couple of the responsibility boxes. He was involved, he hopefully knew about the potential consequences of the test, but not all. Most people would not intend to cause an accident that irradiates their country, cause too many deaths, cost obscene amounts of money to clean up, and result in a near-death experience for themselves. Likewise, Dyatlov, despite pushing for the safety test when he really shouldn't have, arguably didn't willingly kick off the meltdown event. He initiated the safety test, absolutely, but the meltdown was not his goal. His superiors were probably in similar responsibility bins. They were involved and should have known about potential consequences, but it was almost certainly not their intent for the accident to occur. The blame for the event is a bit more murky. As discussed in PhilosophyTube's HBO's Chernobyl and Personal Responsibility video, Dyatlov and his superiors had their reasons for pushing for the test. And the fatal flaw of the graphite-tipped rods in the RBMK reactor design wasn't known to them. But does that absolve them of blame in this situation? If a person blames themselves for an event, which is called self-blame in this paper, it's better understood in this framework that they are attributing the cause of the event to themselves. If a bad event happens, and the person does make this attribution that they caused the event, this can actually help them feel like they have control over the event itself and the outcomes, and that can actually help them more with coping with the event in the future. But if the person attributes responsibility to themselves for this event, either through something like a lapse in judgment or a character flaw, future coping is less successful. Likewise, if the person attributes blame to themselves, they might try to punish themselves for this event happening in addition to the negative outcomes of the event itself. Peterson seems to be talking at the cause or maybe the responsibility level of attribution with his previous examples. The last paper I'm going to bring in for this video is a separate framework for understanding how people respond to events, particularly negative ones. And this framework distinguishes between a person's global and situational meaning. Global meaning is the person's enduring beliefs and valued goals, including expectations for how the world should work and how much control people have over their lives and surroundings. Religion is included as an example of a form of global meaning. Situational meaning is the interaction between the person's global meaning and events that occur. When a negative event happens, several appraisals happen. The first appraisal happens very fast and is basically just about how personally significant this event is to the person. The degree and locus of control come into play here. If the person feels like they're in control of the situation, then this event will be perceived as a challenge. But if the person doesn't feel like they're in control, this event will be perceived as a threat. If the negative event causes the person to question their global meaning because goals are suddenly now up in the air, it can cause a lot of stress. The example given in the paper for this is a professional athlete who gets injured with a career-ending injury. That is a huge amount of stress because, guess what? They're not a professional athlete anymore. The second appraisal involves what the person should do in response to the event. And control comes into play here again. If a person feels like they're in control of the situation and the outcomes, they're going to feel less stress than somebody who feels powerless in this event. Likewise, resources come into play. If you have a lot of money to throw at a problem, you're going to feel less stressed than if you're kind of strapped for cash. Religiosity can come into play here as well. If a person sincerely believes that they have some powerful deity on their side, they're going to feel less stressed than somebody who doesn't. The authors suggest that having a positive appraisal experience can result in better coping and better outcomes from this negative event. And one way they suggest to do this is to try to feel like you're in control in some way. And one way to do this is to possibly shift your perspective. So let's say you got a cancer diagnosis. Instead of focusing on the things you can't control, like the cancer at this point, shift your focus to things you can control, like the treatments and your lifestyle and things you can do to try to improve your odds of beating it. It's also possible for people to experience a shift in their global meaning as a result of this event. Sort of like the example from the paper with the professional athlete. Their goals have to change. Maybe they're able to open up a car dealership, or they're able to do philanthropy work. They're able to focus their time elsewhere and find meaning in their life that way. Underlying all of this is variability in how people respond to this negative life event due to personality differences. Boundlessly optimistic people will probably cope pretty well and continue to have that super cheery outlook on things, while pessimistic people will have this negative life event and probably continue on with a somewhat pessimistic outlook. This paper, and the other papers I talked about, in addition to ones that I didn't, would suggest that this needing to assign blame isn't this universal and inevitable thing that Peterson makes it out to be. And on that, back to Peterson. After talking about people needing to blame something or someone for bad life occurrences, Peterson says that the Russian author Leo Tolstoy questioned the meaning and worth of life. He says that Tolstoy arrived at 4 possible outcomes when faced with nihilism, which Peterson surprisingly doesn't call nihilism. 1. Stick your head in the sand and pretend that you don't know that life is meaningless and evil. 2. Hedonism. 3. The option associated with weakness, according to Peterson's retelling of Tolstoy. Continue on with life full in the knowledge that life is meaningless and evil. Or 4. The option associated with strength, according to Peterson, according to Tolstoy, ending it. Honestly, reading this, it reminded me of how I can sound when I'm in the middle of a depressive episode. To me, this doesn't sound like a profound take on existence, but like someone who is deeply hurting and doesn't see it improving.
Tolstoy wasn't pessimistic enough. The stupidity of the joke being played on us does not merely motivate suicide. It motivates murder. Mass murder, often followed by suicide. This is a far more effective existential protest.
This is basically a walkthrough of the black pill ideology minus the women and sex not having. If you've somehow managed to avoid knowledge of what that term means, I'm sorry that you're going to lose that little oasis of happiness in this video. I'll try to be quick. This all starts with some people not being successful at getting laid. The term incel refers to an involuntary celibate. This term started with a woman having a website talking about her experiences of not being able to have sex and was open for people to share their similar experiences. Over time, that open space was taken over by men who were becoming increasingly open about their displeasure with the lack of sex. And disclaimer here, not all involuntary celibates match the stereotype of the incel, but incel havens like the incel subreddit or incels.me or other online communities were known for being aggressive, misogynistic, and racist. In this mostly online community of lacking laid lobsters, there are some commonalities in ideology, but different outcomes for the different groups. The overlapping ideas between groups revolve around women being at fault for the guy's inability to score. Maybe it's because of feminism, maybe it's a product of evolution and women being driven to try and mate with the top lobster. In either case, this is roughly what's meant by the red pill. Some men try to game the system, imitate the behaviors they associate with the top lobsters, and become pickup artists. Some men decide that women aren't worth the trouble and go their own way. Others, specifically in the incel community proper, believe that they will never have sex, that they are permanently undesirable to women, that the situation came about because of feminism and won't improve, so they should just lay down and rot. This is the black pill ideology. But, as evidenced by some self-described incels who have gone out and killed people, not everybody is content to lay down and rot without getting some perceived revenge first. Which brings us back to Peterson. Peterson lists off some horrifying statistics of mass shootings in the United States before.
Everyone says, we don't understand. How can we still pretend that? Tolstoy understood more than a century ago.
Who says we don't fucking understand this? If anything, we have too many people with too many claims about the root cause of this issue. It's violent video games. It's lack of adequate mental health care. It's feminism and women being too selective in their mates. It's ineffective gun control. Do I need to go on? And yeah, Peterson isn't explicitly calling out the incel community here, but Tolstoy's strong choice is the black pill ideology. Peterson takes it to a violent end. It's just without the sex and women behind it. Peterson includes the Cain and Abel story from the Bible as proof that those authors understood this mindset as well.
Even for a mind as profound as that of the celebrated Russian author, there was no way out. How can the rest of us manage when a man of Tolstoy's stature admits defeat? How can a person who is awake avoid outrage at the world?
As I said, Peterson walks us through a sex-free variant of the black pill ideology. The world is awful. We are awful. We are powerless to change it, so we should just lay down and rot. Or, as Peterson points out, we could go out in a horrendous blaze of glory. So, that was the first section for Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. As is becoming pretty apparent for how these rules go, in this first section, we've done nothing really resembling talking about an explanation for the rule name itself. The tone of this section disturbed me, to say the least. Walking people down the logic that I kind of intuitively associate with the depressive spiral, plus the addition of a roaring rampage of revenge? Not good. We'll see if Peterson's able to build a positive life message out of the burning remains of this first section. I will end this video with something cute. Not sure exactly what yet, but hopefully it's something cute. Something that you have to do when you do experiments with disturbing content is make sure that the participants leaving the experiment are going to be okay. I hope that you, dear viewer, are going to be okay.